Hi, welcome to the Finding Harmony podcast. I'm so happy you're here today. I'm here with my co-host, Russell Case.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. And we have a beautiful guest, glowing guest for you today, Katie Silcox. Hi, Katie. How are you?
Hey, as I was saying, I have a new puppy, so I don't feel super glowing. I'm glad. I'm so happy to be called a glowing guest. I feel like a new mom, but other than that, doing great.
What kind of puppy is he?
She's actually a miniature Bernese and a doodle, so a Bernedoodle. So
That's what I
partially,
wanted. That's what I wanted. A mini Bernie
she's
doodle.
so good. She's so good.
I
She's a
wanted
good dog.
I wanted a little
so
fat,
beautiful.
flatulent pug. That's what I wanted, and I was not allowed to have it.
So we agreed. We got the golden doodles instead. Oh, that's so nice. But yeah, lots of work at the beginning of the year.
And that work still continues today.
Yes, and for maybe a whole year.
Oh my Lord! Don't scare me.
I have an introduction for Katie that I'd like to offer for our audience. If you wouldn't mind. Katie Silcox, M.A., is the New York Times bestselling author of the book Healthy, Happy, Sexy, Ayurveda Wisdom for Modern Women, and soon-to-be-published book Glowworthy, which we'd love to hear more about today. She's the founder of the Shakti School, the world's premier online Ayurveda certification school. Her platform focuses on the convergence of ancient holistic medicine, modern science, and heart-centered spirituality. In a former life, she was cover model for Yoga Journal. It's amazing. And was it says here that you were named one of San Francisco's best yoga teachers by Common Ground in 2009, which was the year that I moved to San Francisco. So I imagine you weren't in that list after 2009.
Because you were the only name on it?
Well, it's deduction,
That's so cool. Are you still in San Francisco?
No. I moved back to my little old Virginia. I'm in Virginia now, Charlottesville.
Charlottesville, Virginia.
Nice.
Beautiful.
Yeah, really nice.
Yeah. How long did you live in San Francisco for?
I was there about 5 or 6 years, maybe. Yeah.
Wow.
I was there during what I call the pop yoga boom.
Right.
It was like when Yoga Journal conferences were really cool and new, and I mean, no offense,
Electric.
Yoga Journal. Yeah, just there was a prana, there was like a real energy, and it was such a fun time to be a yoga teacher.
So could we have maybe rubbed elbows a bit at that time? You were there
Absolutely,
2009.
Yeah. I was there probably 2006 to 2010 or 11, something like that.
Okay, yeah.
I don't live in the linear time world. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know how old I am or what year anything has happened in my life, but yeah.
Was it kind of like a yoga tree or like a Larry Schultz thing? Where were you centered around?
Oh my Lord, I was all over the place. I did teach at Yoga Tree. I taught in Oakland. I lived in Oakland, so I taught at Namaste.
Okay.
Montclair was my first yoga studio.
Okay.
So I was more Oakland than SF, but yeah, it was fun. I was going across that bridge and in a beat up convertible BMW with no windows. And I remember, being a yoga teacher, you don't go into that for the money.
No.
And so I would drive across the bridge just I'm a little Virginia girl. I'm like, please don't stop. Because I knew that you get a ticket for $500 if your car stops on the Bay Bridge.
Oh,
and I was like, I don't have $500.
Right.
So, yeah, that the SF Bay Area yoga experience was a pretty stressful time in my life, actually.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's a brutal economy.
It is.
I mean, even police officers and firemen were moving out of the city and couldn't afford to live in it anymore.
Everybody
at that time.
I knew left. Almost all my good friends from that time have gone, and it's quite sad. And I'm sure it's still wonderful in so many wonderful ways. But I am glad that I'm in a place that's way easier. Like to get in nature in 10 minutes is really easy.
Yeah, that's nice. But if you weren't making $150,000 a year as a developer, minimum. And then you'd have 3 roommates with that money to be able to afford $8,000 a month, it was just it was impossible. It's impossible place
Where
to
are
live.
you guys?
We're up in Canada now. I fled San Francisco for Canada.
We're in Calgary, Canada, where it's much more reasonably priced.
I could not afford to live there anymore.
And although things are quite expensive here too, but not like San Francisco.
But I was in a 1-bedroom rental in San Francisco, and I moved here and I bought a McMansion.
It's not a McMansion. It's
a bungalow. It's got 4 bedrooms.
It's a 1960s bungalow.
It's got a yard. We have 2 dogs.
I tell my friend, like I have a friend in London, and I'm like, oh, my little house. He's like, your 2,000 square foot palace?
Exactly.
Exactly. My Virginia family's like Katie's tiny bungalow. Yeah. I'm like, you guys, like, it's all about perspective, right?
Totally. 100%. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you a question. I grew up in Louisiana, and I was definitely a deviant because I had these secret interests in yoga and meditation. I would just kind of lurk around Slidell High and try and keep to myself, but people knew, they could smell it on you. And I'm just wondering, what was it like for you? Because you said you got interested in spirituality and meditation. Maybe I guess you were 19, so you didn't have to hide that in high school. But did you know that you were different?
Oh, Lord, yes. I mean, I grew up Southern Baptist, and I loved it because I can bow at the bhakti feet of anything, right? It's like it worked for my little undulating heart for a time period. But then I started to have more of a rational approach in high school. I was like, I don't think all my Jewish friends are really going to hell. Right. And so I definitely started questioning things hugely in high school, but I had this amazing experience of going to college in Spain, where I was in this very small sort of private school with all of these people from 400 different cities. And so it was like, and I was like from Virginia. I'd never been to a party before, it was like a huge culture shock. And it became really apparent to me that like there was this huge wider reality than the religious upbringing I'd had. And so I did have like a formal conversation with my mom around leaving my birth religion. And I still remember it being like one of the hardest things I've ever done, and how upset she was. But if we kind of come full circle, I do give Eckhart Tolle and like Oprah Super Soul Sunday a lot of credit. Like my mom is now like, oh, Christ consciousness, and like everybody's going, everybody's on their journey. And so my mom has had this huge evolutionary journey as well. And so, but yeah, I did feel really different, and I still work with the feeling of feeling really different. Like I still feel what one might call in our modern parlance non-neurotypical.
Right.
And I think that that's a dog whistle for, what in the olden days you may have been a priest or a priestess or a yogi or a spirit woman or a shaman, whatever word we're using. Our cultures just don't have a context for that anymore. And so we call it highly sensitive people. Right?
I love that.
Yeah.
And I'll just say one more thing about that, maybe that could support the listeners as well. I always wanted to be a cool girl. Yeah. I wanted to be cool. I wanted to be able to kick it and hang out and do drugs and just go with the flow. And like, I'm still working through it. Like, I'm not a cool girl.
My son asked me to be his Dungeons and Dragons dungeon master for him and his friends.
I love it.
And I said to Jediah, I said, you're gonna want someone cool for that job, and I'm not cool. You understand?
So you get it.
Yeah, I'm not gonna be. No, your friends are not going to look at me and think, "Oh, he's so cool. He's the dungeon master." I'm like, no, that's not going to work out, unfortunately. That's amazing. I'm forgive me, this is a little bit off topic, but how did you even get to Spain? How do you go from Southern Baptist Charlottesville, Virginia to like, I'm a freshman in college in Spain? Like, that seems like such a huge jump.
I mean, it's not off topic. It's completely the work of the self, the soul journey, the thing that is not the ego that's guiding all of us, just had a plan that I still mud wrestle with this, force of soulfulness that's guiding me. But I mean, that's sort of the big answer. But the small answer is I was always really interested in other cultures as a young girl. Like, we had my first experience of something that wasn't like the Deep South was in the 1980s, was a foreign exchange student.
Oh, yeah.
And he was Argentinian, and I was madly in love with him, of course. Because it all gets projected out as like, our crushes. And so, and then I lived in Costa Rica for a summer for like an exchange program myself, and it was just over. Like, I was like, I'm meant to travel the world and learn about culture.
Wow.
And luckily for me, no one in my family ever went to college. I was the first of my lineage, and they just didn't know what I was doing. And so in their naivety, they let me go and do whatever I wanted. Whereas now I'm like, I would never let my kid do what they let me do. And it wasn't that they were bad parents. It's just they were like, well, she's going to do what she wants. Like, she's smart. She's smarter than we are. And not to say my parents aren't, of course, beautiful and brilliant in their own way. But I always had this very sort of directional impetus to my life. And it is only now at the age of 42 where I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And, that's a new thing for me. I've always been very, very directional. And I found a school there that sounded amazing. And
what was that school?
What were you studying?
Yeah. I studied foreign languages and anthropology, and it was an offshoot of St. Louis University. They have a small, very intimate, really cool campus in downtown Madrid, which was just like, I know I was actually 17 when I arrived to Spain. And I mean, I had a curfew of like 10:30, right? And now all of a sudden I'm living in downtown Madrid, which was the party capital of Europe, going to 7-story discotecas with like naked women in cages, like, I mean, it was like,
yeah.
I mean, like, now thinking back, I'm like, oh my God, can you imagine letting your 17-year-old daughter? I would never do that. And like, but yeah, that was, but why it is related to the journey of spiritual practice is like, that is when I realized that I wasn't a party girl. That wasn't going to work for me. I had a lot of anxiety. Alcohol, drugs, all of those sorts of things never were going to be my path, because there was such a sensitivity. And that's when I started getting into yoga and meditation, was being around a lot of, just wild living. And then I got a job in an artificial intelligence think tank after college. Crazy life. And I was working for all these like super brilliant MIT computer scientists that literally nicknamed me the sacrificial virgin, because I had no idea. I didn't even have an email account yet. And they hired me because they were all sort of like autistically on the spectrum. And they were like, we need someone who's like able to articulate emotion in a language token. And so I got hired to, as my boss at the time said, teach the computers how to feel.
Wow.
And so I did this for 4 years. And it was during the big boom of tech, one of the big booms of tech. And they were worse than any frat party any Madrid nightclub. It was a just complete debaucherous, crazy group of guys. And I mean, I could tell you stories, right? And I was never really a part of it.
Yeah.
And that is when I really was like, wow, these guys have the brains, they have the money. We had all of these power players coming in from German royalty, FBI agents, Chicago stockbrokers, wheelers and dealers. And I saw that they were not content.
Yeah. Wow.
And I was young. And so I was like, well, let's really learn about Eastern mysticism, because these people are, doing their best, but it wasn't the path for me.
Yeah. Wow. So did you go to India after that experience?
I got offered a huge raise and a promotion at that. It's hard for me to call it a company. It was almost like a tech cult.
Yeah.
And I got an offer for a raise, and I quit, and I said, and actually, I don't know if this is of interest, but I met someone who was writing a book on Eastern holy men, miracles and magic. Do they really exist?
Oh, cool.
And he said to me, he was a German, a guy from England, Piers Mor'id, beautiful book called Honey and Dust. And he said, you should come with me and go to India and meet all these holy men. And I said, let's go. And so we went in our great hubris and naivety to the weirdest places in India, doing the weirdest things. I mean, India, I'm sure you guys know, is like so hard.
It's weird
to
anyway.
It's weird and weird, wounded, wonderful. It's all the things, but like we were going to the weirdest of the weird, and so I had sort of a strong initiation into India.
That's great. And if you can survive that, you'll go back.
I didn't survive. I will never go back.
There was a kind of ego death.
Yes, I lived there for 6 months, and I say that's enough for this lifetime.
Yeah, wow.
And I loved it, and I met A.G. Mohan and Indra Mohan.
Yeah.
And I lived in their realm for a month, and that changed my life forever. The two of them, really, I consider them. I mean, I get teary. Their kindness and their yoga is the real deal, and they really initiated me.
Oh, beautiful.
It's amazing. I'm just kind of genuflecting on that particular time, late 90s, and that it did seem like tech was such a big deal, but at the same time, they were also in love with the 60s. And so there was a kind of nostalgia for that. And that meant doing a lot of acid and also like finding other kind of funky, like if you could get a chemist into your circle of raver discotheque friends, that was always good, because he'd come up with all of these, new off-brand psychedelics and then everybody was just like trying really hard to push the envelope of their mind. And then they would go, develop code during the day. And it was it was like a Allen Ginsberg poem, like all the best minds of my generation, obliterated. And then you end up somehow you find yourself in India. Like it's just like George.
Well, let me
George
return.
Harrison.
Who I love, but let me return to that idea though of the convergence between Buddhism, yogic thought, and technology. When I worked in this AI lab, the genius / probably con man, crazy man that ran it, I consider one of my first teachers too, and he said to me, what I didn't tell you, is that we were predicting the stock market based on 0 economic variables. It was all about emotional language tokens. And we were doing better than we were one of the first predictive quant prediction boxes. And he said, we're getting the predictions from fractals coming out of emotional data from the news media. That is fractal, and he was seeing these patterns that he would then use to predict the stock market. And so my initiation into this type of Buddhist thought, yogic thought, was actually a technologist.
Yeah, amazing.
Who That's said, incredible. I'm tired of waiting on the people to wake up, including himself. Let's wake up the machines.
Oh my gosh.
And I thought, I don't think so, buddy. I don't know if I can get down with this.
But, I worked for a while for this foundation that was founded by the Jones family, Paul Tudor Jones and Sonny Jones. And Paul recently fired a whole bunch of his staff. He's a hedge fund manager, and he fired a whole bunch of his staff because his algorithmic models were performing better than his staff was.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's really happening.
And I think a testament to something really beautiful, which is we think that we know what's going on. We have this idea of the economy, or what fundamental variables make these things move, when really what's making it move is our psyche.
But like our unconscious, that's the weird thing, right?
The unconscious, exactly. And just look at this whole crypto thing. It's just like, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's surprisingly turned into a giant pyramid scheme, unfortunately.
Surprisingly.
How surprising was that?
Yeah. But it's so cool, like, that you're in this technology bubble kind of, and then went into, like, I mean, when I think of India, I feel like it's just like there's so much humanity there. It's like so raw and real, with like human life and people and magical thinking and all the things that are very, very human. And so it's so interesting that you had these kind of experiences that were very much in contrast to each other, it seems to me.
Well, the psyche needs a compensation mechanism. And so what the East has provided for the Western psyche is a compensation. And I think a lot of Western thought has really been formed on this sort of need for the East, if we're going to generalize. But a similar thing can occur. The individualism of the East kind of or West compensates for the East. But on a more personal level, I had no idea what I was doing. Like, I think unconsciously these things are motivating us and acting through us. And now I don't do a lot of downward dog. I do it every now and then for my health, but I don't study the Eastern texts as much. And because they're all around me, and I've dedicated 20 years of my life and love them, and will come and go. But I think it's really important for me and a lot of the people that I connect with and see out there, that we do connect with some of our Western mystical roots. And so lately I've been really intrigued by the work of Carl Jung and his disciples. And of course, they were a product of their time. But I'm realizing now that these philosophers, even someone like Descartes, which our culture has so misunderstood, and most people have never even read Descartes, and think that he said, "I think, therefore I am." But if you actually read into these philosophers, they were yogis. They were all intuiting energy and matter being connected, being one, and that our psyche had an effect on the body, and that the body was the psyche embodied. And so it's been a real beautiful kind of 360-degree return to the root, to have gone east. And I think in some ways we need to, of course, respectfully as Westerners do that. But I think a lot of the yoga that we're looking for actually exists in our own traditions, which has been pretty mind-blowing for me. And I think can be very helpful for people, in particular when working with the imagery of their own body. We come to yoga, and there's so much beauty and mantra and yantra and imagery and visualization and tantra and laya and all of these technologies that we can, of course, respectfully borrow and use. But what I'm now learning is that there's a yoga that actually emerges out of our own psyche and out of our own body. And that's really where I am right now, of just being really easy about it. Like, what's going to show up?
Can I just ask a question? You've got a lovely Southern drawl to you, but what's also sort of fascinating is to hear you use your tongue in the proper way when speaking any sort of Sanskrit term. And I'm interested.
Wait a minute, are you saying us Southerners don't know how to speak good Sanskrit?
Not to generalize, but it is a fantastic contradiction, or I'm not sure if it's a contradiction, but it's hearing it is fascinating. Like how we learn to speak Sanskrit by chanting, And so we would go to our chanting classes and we'd chant over and over again. And you just sort of pick it up. And I wonder how did you learn how to use your tongue?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. I like you, I'm also a yoga snob. I'm teasing you. I learned from Mohan, and we would sit in his room, and Indra mainly would teach us the Yoga Sutras, and really they weren't sticklers for it, but they taught us not through being an overly disciplinarian approach, but we just repeated it over and over and over. And then I studied for 10 years with Raj Stryker, and he was very, really wanted us to get the Sanskrit right. But also, I went to school for foreign languages, and I'm a musician. And I think when you have that musical ear, you can pick it up really well. And, I've always just been able to kind of impersonate people. And then it kind of becomes your own. Yeah. And I was married to a Spaniard for 5 years. So, I'm just used to like pretending that I can speak all these languages until I can.
Well, that is what they told us in chanting, that that so many students came into that class and wanted to study Sanskrit, as you said, and would be kind of frustrated that they weren't like jumping into grammar day one, or how do you call that when you
constructing
sentences and all of that. It's like no, just listen. Just repeat and don't use your mind. Just sit and listen and absorb, and almost like that's a kind of
that's how Jayashri would say. That's how we naturally learn languages as children, is by hearing them.
Babies.
And so that's the first thing the first sense to understand sound and language is your hearing.
Yeah. When you want to fall in love bad enough, you'll learn their language.
Yeah.
When there's a motivation for the beloved, you'll learn. Whatever way it shows up. There's a funny story I remember hearing about this Texan who went to India and really, really wanted to get enlightened, and was given a goddess photo to worship this goddess, and he was given, by a quote tantric guru, a mantra. And this Texan goes back to Texas, and he stares at the picture of the goddess, and he does the mantra in his like Texas accent over and over again. And he goes and meets this teacher that I was studying with a bit at the time, and he's like, my life has gotten so much worse since I've been worshiping this goddess and chanting this mantra. And the teacher's like, well, chant it for me, like let me hear it. And first of all, show me this goddess. Who have you been worshiping? And he pulls out basically the current Bollywood star, like the Pamela Anderson of India. he just had given them this like that photo of this random Bollywood lady, and so he's looking at her, and then he's like, Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhi. So he's doing
exactly which mantra that is.
The Mahamrinjaya, like all hicked out, and the guru, is like, I can see what your problem may be, And so, but the beauty of that story, and the point of why he told it, was that he said, even he who was worshiping this Bollywood picture, chanting the mantra completely wrong, his heart was so pure that it led him to these teachings that he then was able to receive, that really did continue to shift and change his life. And so I think I always tell students, like, way more important the quality of the heart than the perfection of the tongue.
Perfection of the tongue. That's exactly what I was hearing in your voice.
Well, I'll take it. My ego has been my ego's loving this podcast. I've been like covered in dog poop and like, just haven't shaved my legs in 40 nights. It's just like, wow, I just feel so happy to speak to adults who are telling me I have a perfect tongue. Like how my afternoon just suddenly got great.
Yeah, so much better.
I do want to talk about your books, but I just have this one more question that's interesting that you put in your background. You were practicing yoga in India, and it sounds like you're teaching yoga. But then you commented on how appreciative you were of of being flattered about your tongue quality. You said that you sometimes struggled with anxieties and emotions, and that's an interesting sort of tag to put there. And I wonder if you could talk about that, because it says here that you even stopped teaching yoga because of it.
Well, that's the short version, but I mean, the long version was like, as I sit here with you guys today, I'm really in a place where I'm sort of becoming a Zen Buddhist, where I'm like, oh yeah, I read about all this in Zen Buddhism. Like, there is nowhere to go. And I am like, I feel probably doing a good job on the spiritual path, in that my goal is no longer to not have anxiety or strong feelings or overwhelm, or a lot of the things that this particular body of mine experiences. Whereas before, when I was teaching, studying yoga, I mean, I very much unknowingly was wanting my yoga to make me somebody else that didn't have pain and suffering. And now I realize that that's not a thing. Like, that's not the deal here down on earth. And so when I say I quit teaching yoga, what I mean by that is I started to practice yoga, the real yoga, the yoga of the heart, the yoga sahaja, right? The spontaneous constancy of yoga that requires you in every breath. And that's the practice now. And so and it's not like, oh, I'm advanced now. No. It's just this revelation slowly reveals itself of like, it doesn't matter what I do. It's the quality of the consciousness upon which I approach it. And so in that way, I feel like I'm actually becoming a yogini and maybe sharing a more authentic, ever more authentic version of that in this moment, like, I lift weights because I was so flexible, and like, that is the yoga in this moment. And certainly I could talk with you guys in 5 years and be like, oh my God, I'm so madly in love with like asana flows again. But I needed to do that. And I think a lot of us are as we move along the spectrum of our life, the yoga that we did in our 20s or 30s or 40s, it continues to shift and change. And I think that's a sign that you're supple and you're juicy and you're alive, right? I don't want to be doing, like, not to name names, but like, I don't want my yoga to look like what it looked like 20 years ago.
Yeah. I love that. And I think it kind of leads naturally into the school that you created, the Shakti school, because it's so, I think this feminine energy is so diverse in its expressions, and does 100%. Need to like change as we age, as we go through different cycles, as we go through different transitions in our life. And like, even just the female body, experiences so much, like, of just a vaster range of changes than a male body in, pregnancy and menopause and giving birth and, even just our cycles every month. And there's just this constant kind of flow and fluctuation and high energy and low energy. And like, not to say that male bodies don't go through different transition periods, but it's just very maybe amplified in very obvious ways in a feminine kind of form. And this idea even of the Shakti being like the power that is giving the energy to that consciousness, or to that Shiva form, right? To that sort of male counterpart. I love this idea of the Shakti school and everything that you've talked about as far as like the evolution of practice in your own life.
There's a piece to that the Shakti and the Shiva, because they're always together.
Yeah.
I learned this new word and it makes me feel very smart. It's teleos, like a teleological process is happening. And for the listeners that don't know, I didn't know that word. And it's such a freaking good word, because what it means is there is a function inside of us. We could call it that Shakti force, right?
Yeah.
And the Shiva. that is actually taking us on a learning journey. And the only response before that kind of spiritual understanding is humility. Like, I genuinely have no idea what's happening, right? And I do know I'm looking for the signs and symbols along the way that are reminding me you're on a journey, you're on a journey. And like, the more I can kind of step back and say, I really don't know what will happen today, I do know I'm going to have an emotional reaction. I do. That's
predictable. Yeah.
It's totally predictable. And I'm a big old fat hothead, and I've got all the fire and like, and all the water. And so like what that shows me is like, I'm going to get triggered throughout the day. It's going to happen. There's going to be a moment when I don't like the feeling that I'm having. And that's where we do yoga.
Yeah.
And this whole culture that we're in right now is almost the complete opposite. It says, I want the outside world and everyone else to make me feel okay. And the yogis and the mystics, they are like, no, that's never going to happen. Like, yes, we want to love each other. We want to do right by each other. We want to respect each other. And if I can like speak in a way that makes you feel more loved and more comfortable, of course I'm going to do that. But the spiritual journey is, I am learning to tolerate myself in whatever arises through the field of experience that's about to happen. Like, that's the yoga. That's the Shakti guiding me. And I think it tends to teach us through challenging things. It's not so much the orgasms and bonbons and puppies moment, like happy puppies.
Nice.
Yeah.
It does. That's what we want, right?
Yeah.
But like my puppy like wouldn't go down the stairs, and she's like right, and I'm laughing my ass off, like, look at this dog, she can do it, right? And I feel like that's really the essence of what is happening in our psyche. Like, for me at least, it's like, this sucks. And the God within me is like laughing, like, you're doing great, and that really is the teleological journey that we're on.
Yeah. I love that.
I'm just gonna look that teleological.
Don't Google it. He's like, well, I'm getting fact checked live.
No. I'm just very interested.
I'm teasing.
Teleo.
No,
there it is. Relating to.
It's so incredible.
Explanation of phenomena. Oh, that's
sorry,
fantastic.
What did you say?
Well, but the phenomenon has its own intended goal. Yeah. So that's it's like your future self is pulling you to it.
In terms
come on, man.
Yeah. They serve.
Kind of like
There's
a dharma,
purpose.
Right?
It is dharma. It's the word. You nailed it. It's dharma.
Yeah,
so we have objects in our lives that have purpose.
You're on your way, whether you like it or not.
Right, kicking and screaming, or riding the wave softly.
Yeah. So what was it? When did you, I guess, found the Shakti school? How did that come about?
Oh, I don't know. I think it was like 6 years ago. I wrote Healthy, Happy, Sexy. It was a book about Ayurveda. I call it Cosmo Magazine, meets Ayurveda. It's sort of a primer for us regular gals on Ayurveda. And people seemed to like it. And I was teaching a lot of yoga, and people just asked me to do a Ayurvedic certification course. And I was like, no, I want to teach like yoga, juiciness, movement, this and that. And that people just kept asking, and I finally listened to them.
Yeah.
And started to say, I think I should listen. And then we created it. And it's an Ayurveda certification, but really it's like, just like lady life school.
Yeah.
It's a soulful place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. What kind of things do people learn when they're coming into the school?
We learn all the basics of Ayurveda, and I kind of let other people smarter than me teach a lot of the Ayurveda stuff. And then I teach a lot of the Tantra and the spirituality and the mysticism and a lot of the energy work. And so we do everything. We talk about conscious sexuality, herbology, cooking. We have several amazing chefs. Dr. John Douliard just joined our staff, and he's teaching on Ayurvedic aging and athleticism.
Oh, cool.
So we really, I could talk we do so many cool breast massage, yoni steaming. We do a lot of really interesting things, but the whole thing that frames it is really about taking the space and time to be able to tune into the intuitive sense. And that guru, that internalized sense of quiet and peace and love, that begins to become the teacher upon which you make lifestyle choices or relationship decisions, or you know, and I think that I really want to say it's important to me, because we are dealing with like a lot of rules and regulations and formalities in Ayurveda, which is all good because they're traditions that need to be preserved. But even the teachings themselves say they must be coming from this place of being situated within the soul, within the self. And so I consider myself like sort of a rule breaker, because I think when you're kind of steeped in the soul, it doesn't always look like the formal rules and regulations. And of course, this is a very feminine form path. So, you know, we break rules a little bit. And, yeah.
I love hearing you say that. It just, I feel like seen and justified.
Yes. I feel like we might have walked over the breast massage and yoni stimulation piece. And I just like, we just kind of went right over it.
He said yoni. So you actually beautifully presented us with a Freudian slip.
Yeah.
He said yoni stimulation.
Is that not what you said?
I said steaming. Yoni steaming.
Yoni steaming. That does sound quite stimulating. The question I have about it is,
I need to have you two back on my podcast. This is so fun.
I personally, I really love reading a Cosmo. If you could put it in front of me, I will take the opportunity to learn. I'm a lifelong learner. And I liked how you put it, that it was an Ayurveda book with a kind of Cosmos slant. And you definitely get that, like, you know, chapter 12, why modern girls should meditate, or the power of your womb, you know. There's lovely chapters here that are fascinating and a bit Cosmo
for you.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No. If I had a subscription to Sassy Magazine, you're going to tell me I'm intimidated by Cosmo version of Ayurveda? I don't think so. But what this is where I want to ask you about is how the provenance of this book, because my experience of India is that it is a hardcore patriarchal, sexually deeply oppressed society that is very highly reactionary to texts in the public sphere that suggest anything otherwise. Like the amount of flame that Wendy Doniger received for her Hindu book that suggests that, you know, in prehistorical times there was sexuality in India. You know, there are 1.4 billion Indians, you know, from sex, but
something,
you know. So I just, how do you balance this incredibly sexually oppressive and patriarchal place like India with the creation of a book like this? It's so much more about female sexual empowerment.
Well, two things. One, thank you for being real and brave and saying what you think. And two, welcome to why I'm stressed out all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, thank you for
you being
kind enough to say, look, so when you feel like you're in a paradox, you're a tantric. Like that's where we live. We live in the burial grounds. We do prana life practices sitting on, you know, in graveyards, right? I'm not saying I do that regularly, but the idea is that, and in some ways we could say the same thing about our Western Christian puritanical roots. Do you know that, you know, churches used to be places where people entered into ecstatic dance, and the prana was getting too high, and so they took the pews out. They put the pews in, me, so that people would sit still, right? And so we have this story that we could say is an Indian story, but really it's a story that's had its sort of flowering in different places at different times everywhere, where it affects women and men, where we have this sort of denial of sexuality and sensuality. And then we have the flip side, which we could say is modern Western society, which is just as insidious, where everything is just displayed as if nothing is holy or sacred, and everything can be sort of in the public sphere, and there's nothing hidden. Like by nature, keeping something hidden is the way you make it erotic. and holding an inner sanctum. That's why we have churches, temples, cathedrals. They're not places of a lot of light. We bring a candle because they're dark intentionally. It's being held in a womb space, right? And so there's a lot of paradox here. I was in India. I was actually in Khajuraho in the erotic temples. Very much feeling this energy. I mean, if you've ever been there, it is wild. And the imagery is, I mean, they were just, and of course it was happening, but it was also symbolic of energy. And I was standing there at this beautiful place, and this young man comes up to me, and I could already feel what was going down. And he was like, "Madam, you like these erotic images?" I'm like, "Yes." I'm trying to be a good cultural steward and tourist. I'm like, "Yes, very wonderful." He's like, "No, you really like." You know, and so I do know what you're talking about. And I think you know, there are a lot of women who come into our program who are from India who feel very seen, because here we're taking these ancient teachings that we do our best to present in a respectful way, while at the same time doing exactly what these ancient texts, the Charaka Samhita says, these words must be presented for the time, place, and people in which they are. They must be given in a cultural way that's relevant so that people can hear them. Otherwise, they'll become undigestible. You have to make things warm soup for people initially, or they will become poison. And so what I've really, with all my heart, tried to do is be real, you know, and I've gotten a lot of pushback.
Yeah,
not
I can
a
imagine.
lot, but some, right? I mean, I've gotten, you don't know how many white guys in Marin who've written me and told, you know, they're wearing like their Hindu outfits and telling me I'm the worst thing that's ever happened to Ayurveda.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, I initially it was like really bothersome to me because my heart was so full of that young enthusiasm for being a steward of these practices. And I'm just going to keep doing my best to do that. And I think that's what we have to do. But as women, what I tell the women, like even a book like the Kama Sutra, this was written by men for men in a time period where women did not have a lot of power. And so I always say to our students, look, here are a bunch of Taoist tantric books because they are way more feminine friendly. But more importantly, what my teachers tell me and what the inner teacher within me is sensing is that these practices will never be able to be written down. And that is what blows people's brain holes open. And then they either leave my school or they say, "Oh, thank you," because they're oral traditions. They're meant to be passed from my heart to your heart. And they're also personal, right? Like the way you and your partner make love, I would never, ever want to be involved in that or tell you a book about it, or, you know,
Wait, what are we talking about?
No one wants to read your transcripts.
I think we can offer up great advice on working with energy. Don't get me wrong. But I think there's something spontaneous and magical that emerges when two people are intimate that can't be codified. Totally. And I feel the same way about yoga asana. I feel the same way about spirituality in general. We have to walk that double-edged sword that is a paradox that yes, we need teachers, and yes, we need lineages, and yes, we need these practices codified to some extent. But when we go too far, which is essentially what a lot of these quote patriarchal systems have done, they flip back on themselves and become the very structural things that keep us oppressed and keep us out of awakening, right? I mean, there's that great story of the yogi who's so obsessed with his samadhi, and his wife keeps making noises, and she comes in with like a little sweet treat for him, and he just rages at her like, "Do you know I was in like the 7th level of samadhi, blah, blah, blah." And she says to him, "What kind of samadhi is this that goes away when you open your eyes?" And of course, in that moment, he becomes enlightened and realizes she is his guru all along. And that's how I feel about the spirituality world. When I go and I visit with my 70-year-old people in the nursing home that I get the pleasure of being with once a week, and they are this one little woman with her hunched over back, she can barely look up at me. Her spine is so curved over. And this African-American woman with her little hat that says, Jesus loves me. And she has stains on her shirt because she's crunched over and she's spilling her food all over. And she looks up at me and she says, you're a dancer. You just come here and they said you were going to teach us yoga stretches, but you're a dancer. You know, I'm like, that to me is the guru. That's what I'm interested in. And you can't get that in a book. And I know that doesn't even answer your question, but I hope it touches on something.
Totally. I love what you're saying, because I just feel so aligned with that, because it's even like what I love to talk about, which is, you know, finding that spiritual or that mystic experience in everyday life. Because to me, that's the yoga. That is why you would practice yoga, is to have exactly what you're talking about, like realize that holiness or that divinity that's all around you in other beings, whether they see it or not, you know, and taking God as your teacher all around you.
Exactly. And the next level of it, because I love those juicy bliss moments. What if we were doing it with the crappy moments where you're picking up your dog's poop because it woke you up the night before, and like somebody dumped you, and you know, you have a pimple, like all these things where we're like, I don't like that, and I don't like that, and I don't like this, and I don't like my internal state. Like, what if that also were the fuel for the spiritual fire? And that's what I'm kind of working with right now, of not needing to always be in the bliss.
Yeah. Beautiful. Tell us what your next book is focused on, because it sounds so interesting.
It's a sex manual. Just kidding. It's about yoni stimulation. No.
So I'm on Gamazon right now, and it's Glow Flow. Is that what that is?
It's Glow Worthy. It's not on there yet. It's not coming out. It's not coming out till
there's
next
a place
fall.
where you can subscribe for future purchases. So
great. Well, get on it. Yeah, no, it's a book that I was telling you guys before we started the podcast. Like, its original title was Holy, and it was inspired by the quintessential Carl Jung idea that he would, you know, said, I would rather be whole than good. And really trying to you know, offer up a 360-degree version of spirituality where you get to be one of these goddesses who's called she who is never not broken.
Beautiful.
It's really a book to her. And you know, it's practical. There's a lot on energy work through the mentorship I've been doing over the past 4 years with a woman named Crystal Mortensen, who's a very powerful somatic therapist, but also a master energy worker out in Hawaii. And so, inspired by our deep partnership of now about 4 or 5 years, this book came through, and I hope it can be a way that, you know, it's for women and men, but we definitely talk a little bit about women specifically, of how to connect to God through your own body. So in that way, it's a tantric book.
Yeah, beautiful.
I'm just really fascinated by this whole conversation. Is this kind of this elemental conflict between Shiva and Krishna, or Shiva and Vishnu, is the establishment of society and its norms, and the way that a society can keep itself safe from threats. But obviously, no one's going to reach fucking enlightenment when you're worried about being safe from threats all the time. Whereas, you know, you've got your left-handed path, you have your Shaivites who are trying to, you know, encourage you to let go of constructs and let go of these normative behaviors that are holding you back from pure consciousness and from the pure mystic experience. And yet so like this is why, say like the BJP or the Hindutva will try and control their mystic religion, their Hindu practices, because women have to be controlled so that the child doesn't go off, taking a whole bunch of drugs in a discotheque in Spain. It's a bad outcome, right, of the family. And so, but yet we do want to also encourage this mystic experience that you do experience when you're on a whole bunch of drugs in a discotheque in Spain.
Sometimes.
Very often. And so it's a really kind of, in a very fundamental, elemental way, an incredibly frustrating experience of being alive. Having to juggle these two fucking things that are terrible.
Totally.
To have to try and juggle.
I was sitting outside this morning and I was feeling, to speak in like the modern way, the part of me, one of my parts, which I named Jennifer. One of my parts I was noticing was like this, and I'm like getting real honest.
Yeah.
And I mean, this part was basically like, fuck this shit, I don't want to be here. Not like, oh, I'm going to peace out, suicidal, depression, nothing like that, right? But like just this piece you spoke to of the fundamental paradox of just being here. And the deal that Buddha talked about, I think most eloquently, that like you are here in university of soul. And by nature, it is impermanent. And yet you can never get out of it until you can. It is a samsaric wheel that's just going to keep going, right? And the deep frustration around the paradox between the sort of left and right of destruction and continuation. And why I love Carl Jung so much is that this way of seeing the psyche allows for your inner Shaivite and your inner Vishnavite. It allows for all of these different parts of you, because there's a part of me that desperately wants to be here and is so grateful to be here. And you know it, right? You just go outside and look at a bird for like 2 seconds and you're just like, what? This is a miracle. I'm so grateful. And yet there's this other part of me that's like, this is miserable. Somebody's really annoying me on this email and, all the minutia of daily life. And I think my teacher says it's when you just recognize that you're nailed to the spot between this paradox place. It's very Zen. It's very middle path. And I don't identify as any of those groups of people, because I think as soon as you start to identify with one particular mystical flavor, there is a value in going deep in one path, only in as much as you're able to know that it's not real.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, how many times have you all, I'm sure, and myself, seen ourselves or our friends or other people get really caught in their spiritual practice and their identity.
Right? Orthodoxy suddenly comes forth.
Yeah.
But that is the wonderful thing about Krishna, is this Vishnu avatar, is he does eventually say, give up all. Oh, I just ripped my wife's earbuds out in my excitement. Give up all things and come to me, which is something that is so important to you, is this bhakti devotion.
Exactly. And what does it mean? Does it mean we throw out our clothes and give all our money away? Maybe. But what it means is that we offer up each moment, each thought, each feeling into the fire of consciousness. And here's the deal. It's not judging. You're in your ego if you're just like, this is the good thing and this is the bad thing and this is the part of me I can't, and to like really be in the power of the bhakti. Bhakti is the end result of having done something else.
Oh, like prostration.
Yeah. Okay. Bhakti is the natural field of mind.
I love that, because it's like love, right? Love is the essence of what connects, what brings together, what creates that wholeness.
I wish you guys were my friends in Charlottesville. We would just be kicking it. I'm like, oh, y'all are hashtag attachment.
That's
we can talk anytime.
Perfect.
That's
y'all come down to Charlottesville. I'll talk like a Southerner and I'll speak Sanskrit to you right.
That's University of Virginia, right?
Yeah.
And so
my house is actually 4 blocks from UVA.
Oh, wow.
So do you know our friend John Baltman there? Have you met him around?
No, but I need to be introduced to good people. I still feel like I'm new to the area, because when I moved here, I was traveling and touring.
Right.
And it's only been the past COVID years that I've really been like, okay, this is my community. I'm going to really invest. Yeah. So I still feel like a newbie.
He also, he still works for that fellow I was talking about before, Paul Tudor Jones.
He runs their yoga program.
Runs their little Mysore yoga program.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that program.
And he and I became friends because he used to skateboard in Slidell, Louisiana, where I lived, and so we had that in common, became buddies. But
he's also a bit of a Christian mystic.
Oh, y'all have to hook us up.
We
I'd love to meet a Christian mystic yogi at UVA. There's actually this place is a secret. Like, apparently all underground is amethyst quartz crystal, and it draws a lot of healers and writers. John Grisham lives here. Sissy Spacek, Chad Harbach, great American novelist, and Goldfinch. I don't know if you read the Goldfinch.
Oh yeah, the Goldfinch. Yeah, what's
here.
Her name?
Yeah, I can't remember. And you know who else is here? The Rock.
Oh yeah.
No. He used to live in Calgary, you know?
Yeah,
right?
Really?
Yeah.
So it's like a secret place.
That's cool.
Oh, what is her name?
So fun. That's wonderful. So tell us a little bit about, how can people work with you? What's coming up for you in the next couple weeks?
Oh my Lord. I mean, January 18th, we launch level 1. We have one thing we do, really. It starts in January. So if people want to join our year-long program, we have that coming up. And we let people in the doors through January, usually, maybe even February if they're nice. They ask nicely. Yeah. And then, that's really it. I'm on Instagram. We have a newsletter and we have a subscription program. So if you want to join me once a month and just do a little spiritual practice together, that happens. And yeah, like I said, just all my love goes into this one thing, really, and that's Ayurveda school right now. Yeah,
that's wonderful. And I mean, I love how you've taken this ancient, practice, or all these ancient teachings of Ayurveda. And I've studied Ayurveda a little bit as well, but the thing that always kind of, never really sat with me in a way that I could put it into practice was just, it's so complicated. Like when you really start to get into it, it's quite like, you have to lay down your mat over here and build a hut this way, like lay out all the things and set up your life this way. And, there's so many practices to do just to
what's that called? Vastu?
Vastu.
Yeah.
Just to get out of bed in the morning.
You have to pause, and this brings so much compassion for us.
Mm-hmm.
You have to pause and think about the mind of the people that are creating this,
right?
And the amount of time and energy and spaciousness that they had in their lives to be able to feel that level of subtlety of energy.
Yeah.
And so what I tell people is, if you grew up like me eating ding dongs and Slurpees from 7-Eleven, and y'all granddaddy was smoking right on top of your head,
that's like a good afternoon right there.
How we roll. That is an afternoon for some of us. Like if you can just start eating warm and wet cooked foods, start there. I mean, people are always getting so worried about the rules. I'm like, where are you starting from? And
that's what I've been thinking. Is it a true left-handed path? Is I should really start smoking again, because it fills me with so much love. I smelled someone was smoking yesterday with her dog. She was out. She was like, I'm going to smoke a cigarette. I'm out with my dog. And I was like, oh, it reminds me of my grandparents so much. And they would just sit there and smoke. They would blow smoke on my face because you got to learn them young.
He's getting
They're not going to learn. They're not going to learn unless you blow a smoke. They got to breathe it in.
It's like we have to accustom them to their life in a seedy bar surrounded by pool tables and prostitutes.
Right away.
Yeah.
Today.
So do you know that great Buddhist, I don't know, koan or legend about the student asked the Buddha or the Buddhist teacher, guru, master, can I smoke cigarettes while I meditate? And he's like, absolutely not. And then he's like, but you can meditate while you smoke. And that really summarizes those two paths, right?
Yeah, yeah, totally. I love
that. Pure consciousness.
So I'm gonna go. Yeah, if you're going to be smoking, definitely enjoy it.
Yeah,
that's right.
Be present. Be present. Bring that amount of presence. I mean, you kind of came full circle to that we talked about at the beginning. Is like how much presence, how much awareness, how much consciousness can you bring into the things that you're doing, into the relationships that you're having, into whatever you're setting your mind to.
There's a book I just feel like we're not even on podcast. I'm just like hanging out with you guys on Zoom. But there's this book you guys have to check out that our listeners would love. And I've never met him, but there's a book called Already Free by the Buddhist psychologist. God, his name is slipping me. Bruce Tift.
Okay, I love
that. He's like a licensed marriage family therapist kind of guy, but deep Buddhist roots, Boulder Buddhism. Boulder Buddhism.
Right.
It's like a real center for Buddhism. Yeah, and that book is like desert island top 5 for me.
Amazing.
And the other one is this incredible guy who's like underground, who I one day want to like find this guy. If you're listening, Michael Brown has written a book called The Presence Process.
Is he he's not the one that died recently, is he?
Did he die? I don't know.
Who's the one that OD'd he's South African in Seattle? Oh, different guy.
No, I don't think this is
Michael Stone.
Oh,
and it was in Victoria.
It's Victoria, that's right.
But those two books really do speak to this. They're so practical, and yet they really speak to the paradox of the path of being developmentally mature, doing the work, doing the therapy, doing the somatic release, doing the trauma release, blah blah blah, and all that shit that we all have to do, and then this very pristine diamond-like presence that's already given, that's already here. And the need for both therapists, right, psychotherapists as psychologists, to understand that, as well as people who are more focused on that Shiva pristine consciousness, to, we've all known those people who are like meditating for 40 hours, but they're really bad boyfriends. Right. And so like that developmental realm of like, well, your mom made you this way, so you need to work through this. And, those two realms can actually come together and coexist. And I think that's just such a beautiful sort of way of understanding the feminine and masculine, the yin and the yang of it all. That obviously has nothing to do with your genitals.
Yeah.
Right. Or your biology.
But also everything to do with it.
No, it's just an energy, though. It's just like
I love it. I love how brave you are. I do really think that there is something to be said for the physiology that doesn't get a lot of press, that the ancient, especially Taoists, understood around our anatomy and the way that the juices, as they call them, affect our consciousness. And it initially, at least, is very different. It is different.
Yeah.
No,
and we're sort of being told not to make it so. And that's a cross I'd die on.
Your basic experience of being inward or outward is fundamental. It's a fundamental, foundational way of thinking about the world.
Well, I mean, even just like if you think scientifically, I mean, there's hormones, there's chemistry, and this is, of course, there's variations, right? But there are like sort of large, broad generalizations as well. Otherwise, we wouldn't have dichotomy.
Right. And what's so cool about the duality of the yin and yang, or the masculine, feminine, the male and the female. What's so cool about that huge spectrum is that it has endless variation.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, that sort of explains everything, and we should all be at peace, right? Like there's that duality has endless variation. And then you get to what, the very hated Jordan Peterson says is like,
the Canadian.
The Canadian, who's very, very hated. And he says, if you keep bringing, each of these generalities down further and further and further, i.e. intersectionality, right? And we keep kind of parsing the intersectionality on a grid, what you get is called, ready? The individual. So like, so cool, right? It's like, oh yeah, individuality is definitely an important thing to acknowledge.
He's a guy that often dies on the cross of being taken out of context, and it's it's having a rough go of it.
I've listened to him a lot and read all his books, and I really love him, and I love a lot of the things he says, and I'm sure I'll get a few emails. I always do whenever I mention him in any sort of positive way. But I also see his dark side, and it's pretty dark, and so like it's a good example of like the way in which we put people into good and bad boxes. And I've really seen him go through this horrific journey with benzos and being addicted to benzos and being given benzo, whatever they're called, and almost benzodiazepine. And like coming out the other side, and I can just hear the like trauma being released in him. He definitely has PTSD. I mean, it's very obvious. But I mention him because I think it's a great example of the way that our mind is so quick to want to put people into these good and bad boxes. And I think that's really where we are culturally as well. The us versus them, the atomization of our society is emblematic of the way that we're doing that inside ourselves. And so like this way of seeing ourselves as all of these different parts that all get to come to the spiritual party and be loved on. And some of them been given good boundaries. Like, sorry, you don't get to date. You're 12. Right? Like you don't get to choose the guys that I go out with anymore. You're 12. Right? So it's been really helpful for me to, when I do that internally, it's much less likely that we're going to externalize and project that outward, which I think that we're sort of come to a crisis of sorts in our culture of what a Jungian would call projection.
Yeah, 100%. And like the cancel culture is really canceling aspects of ourselves out, and I mean, we can't really do that, can we?
So I love that you said it. You said it so well. You said it so well. It's we're canceling ourselves.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of shifting. People are starting to be like, yeah, that didn't work.
And I think, I think it helps to have these more nuanced conversations about situations and people and things, and also bringing to the table the complexity of being human, and this idea of paradox, right? That nothing is completely, within the black is black, there's that little speck of white, like you're talking about, with the yin and the yang. Within the light, there's a speck of darkness, and you need to have these, nothing is ever just one thing. And like between, like you were saying, the 1 and the 0 is an infinite number of points. And so you have the infinity right there between the 0 and the 1. And so where are you going to stop, right? There's no end to it. There is only like what is infinite.
I mean, I can barely take that in with my mind, this idea of infinite. But what I feel is like, if you really are on a spiritual path, I think that I've seen, when I'm in my little sense of being, okay, I'm in my dharma, there's always this quality of humility. And I know I'm talking a lot about Jung, but I'm geeking out on that hard right now. And he says, if you don't know who you really are, if you don't find what he called the self, the soul, you will do one of two things will happen, or both. It will show up as a symptom, or it will come to you as a projection. It can only be synthesized as a symbol, he would say. So the self has to be known. And I thought, wait a minute. Maybe I'm going to actually take all this Jungian stuff and like do another Cosmo Magazine meets Carl Jung, because it is dense as fuck. Like you have got to really plow through this stuff. But what he said, you guys, this is so powerful. It says, if you don't really touch the essence of who you are, don't worry. He said, because thank God, he says, you will become neurotic. Thank God she became neurotic. And what will occur is it will show up in your body and your mind as a symptom. 1 out of every 2 Americans says that they have some level of anxiety and depression. It will show up as a projection. That is social media. Social media is a selfie, taking a picture of a selfie, Like it's projection meet projection. And so I just think, okay, when you turn that around and you take back the power of your projections, that Shakti comes back to you. So that to me is the ultimate yoga. Yoga definition for me is to make that which is in us that is unconscious conscious. And that's just what I'm trying to do, and share it with other people.
Well, I love this paradox that you hold in yourself, which is the Southern Belle as mystic. And it is a phenomenal.
Will you come on my team and just be our public? You can just speak for I just love it how you kind of digest me and spit it back out in a way I just never would think to do.
Chewing on women has been one of my pastimes, and I look forward to that opportunity in the future. And but thank you so much for you sharing your story with us. There's like there's a bottomless well here, and I would love to dip our toes back in. Is this
drink the cup?
Drink from the cup.
You guys I will not be exaggerating when I say this, and I'm known to exaggerate. As all great tantrics were very hyperbolic and never politically correct.
Oh my goodness.
But you guys have been the single funnest podcast I have ever done, bar none. I feel like I'm with friends that I've known for a decade, and I really just feel like I hope this is just the beginning of an ongoing conversation and friendship. It just feels so wonderful to be with you guys.
I would love
Fabulous.
that.
I would recommend to everyone to pick up
the...
Healthy, Happy, and Sexy by Katie Silcox. This is Beyond Words Press.
And look for Glowworthy. When is Glowworthy released?
October 2023.
Coming in a few months.
Coming soon.
Pre-order your copy.
Coming soon, exactly.
To a Barnes & Noble near you, or an Amazon.
Thank you guys. This has been just so fun, like I said, and I feel like these are the kinds of conversations we all need to be having. So thank you for being 100%. Brave enough to have it with me.
Oh, it's our pleasure.